Welcome to Masters of Self University podcast, your highest source of sacred truths and universal wisdom. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Rachel Fiori, mystic, spiritual teacher, psychic healer, and founder of Masters of Self University. Join our journey of soul transformation as we deep dive into this latest episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Masters of Self University podcast. I'm your host, Ellie Lee.
And I'm your host, Danny and Morley.
And today we are joined by mystical life coach, Madison Creel.
Hey Madison, welcome.
Hi guys, thank you. Good to be here.
Good to see you.
So we're talking about boundaries today, right?
Yes, boundaries. I feel like that's a hot topic these days. And I feel like a lot of times I hear people just ask, what are boundaries and how do we set them and why do we need to set them? And I just figured it'd be a good topic to go into, especially with our background as mystical life coaches. Yeah.
You've been setting any boundaries then?
I've had to, for sure. I've had to learn to, because I started I grew up really not valuing myself, as most of us do. We're taught to put other people first, and we don't want to step on anybody's toes. And so I see that a lot, mostly in my relationships, throughout my previous relationships, just how I've evolved and how I look at myself back in my first relationship. And literally, I don't think I set a single boundary. And now to this day, I still see that show up sometimes, but then I'm able to go into it. And so we'll go a little bit into what that looks like as well. And just kind of how it affects your overall life and your quality of life and your evolution as a person.
Yeah. I think first we should get clear on what is an actual boundary. Because I think a lot of people get confused of some people create weak boundaries. Some people create boundaries to suppress or bypass and then there are powerful boundaries. So how would you describe a boundary?
Yeah, no, it's kind of hard to put a specific definition, but the way that I see it is getting clear about who you are, what you value, what is okay and what's not okay for you as a person, and then being able to express that. And the first part of that is being able to just identify who you are and when you're coming from, kind of like you touched on, Ellie, when you're setting a boundary, you're telling somebody, or your work and your relationship, your friendships, what it is you are okay with and what it is you're not okay with. But part of that is even getting to know yourself more, like understanding, is this really because this is what I need for the person that I am and what I value? Or is it because I'm coming from woundedness and I need to control these aspects of my life so I don't get triggered, and more coming from that weakness, like you were saying. Mm-hmm. So first of all, it comes with a lot of needing to go in and heal. Doing the work that we're doing is seeing when you're coming from weakness, seeing when you're telling somebody to do or to not do something because you don't want them to trigger you. You don't want them, you can't handle whatever it is that's going to bring up within you. And then going in and doing the work on that. And then also, like, maybe if we give an example, it might be helpful. So what I'm thinking of is, let's say at work, let's just give an example of at work when they're piling you with a lot of work and you aren't able to set a boundary of like, okay, this is my time. This is what I'm getting paid for. So I'm going to do this amount of work and not this amount of work. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's setting a healthy boundary for what you're able to give to the company and what you feel like you're valued as for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. If you maybe were to be coming from weakness, maybe you wouldn't be setting a boundary. Maybe you would just be letting them kind of walk all over you and push more stuff on your plate. Maybe if you were setting a boundary from weakness, it would be, no, I can't do any of this work. It's too much, because you're you are not wanting to do the work that they're giving you. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just like a simple example to see how a boundary would play out in a situation like that.
Totally.
I just got a definition came through. It is, I had to just sit with it for a second. It is a boundary is a clear definition of what you will or will not tolerate.
Love it. Yeah.
Because there are certain things like that we can tolerate, right? And then there are some things that's like, nope, that I don't, if you're going to do that, this is a boundary. I do not tolerate that kind of behavior. This is a very clear definition of what is acceptable in this moment. And the more, I mean, boundaries are really tough to make.
Yep.
Especially when you're very unhealed. I remember when I was first learning like this concept of setting boundaries in like the mystical life coach certification, I had such a hard time with understanding what they were because I never set any in my life. I'd spent all of my programming was created around trying to make sure that people liked me. And so like to go to your work example, right? There was no boundaries at work. I did whatever I could to make sure that whoever my boss was, whoever my peers were looking at me in a good light, because I couldn't take the fact that they would look at me in any other light than something positive. And I'd never been role modeled to by my parents about boundaries, basically at all.
Yeah.
There was very little structure and boundaries when I was growing up. So I really didn't have an understanding of what that was. And then I was also watching like some of my caregivers just getting completely walked all over. And that was the programmings that I adopted. So when it came to learning about setting boundaries, I was like, I don't even know what a healthy boundary looks like, because I barely even knew what an unhealthy boundary was.
Yeah.
Right. And we're also like praised like or societally for being selfless, like, oh, look how selfless she is. And it's like that's what we're getting praised for, but then we're also like getting praised for pushing ourselves down and devaluing ourselves. And so when we're surrounded by people saying stuff like that, then it makes it hard to want to even value yourself enough to set a boundary. And Danny, I want to ask you, with that example, when you thought of having to set boundaries, what would come up for you? Like the thought of setting boundaries.
The first thing that comes through is like less of a thought, but just the emotional program of powerlessness of like, I don't feel powerful enough to do that. And then the thoughts are, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want anyone to think badly of me. If I say that, they might be offended. A lot of like programs coming from just weakness. Yeah.
Because I think people who are running powerlessness and weakness, they take boundaries personally, you know? So like they get offended by it or they're hurt by it. When in reality, like if it comes from power, then beautiful, there's wounding for you to go into that. Because when a boundary is made from power, you can feel the energy of that. You know, I had this one girl talk to me. She's like, yeah, I put up a boundary with my mom and my sister and they just walked all over it. And it's like, yes, it's because it was coming from powerlessness, you know? Right. And that's why when people feel that energy, they're like, they just laugh at you and then they tread all over you.
And then you're allowed to tread all over you.
And then you cycle into all kinds of other programs of like shaming yourself and judging yourself and like blah, blah, blah. But that's how you got to do the work to create that boundary from a place of power.
And part of setting boundaries is following through with whatever you put, because otherwise it's just, what is it? Like a suggestion.
Right.
It's just that's what Rachel says. Like, otherwise it's just a suggestion. And so when you do, like, even though, so you can set because I've experienced this before, you can set a boundary from from a powerful place. It can still trigger you. So you can still know that you're coming from a powerful place. You set a boundary, the other person, because you can't control how they're going to react, and it could trigger a different wound within yourself. So in my situation, this person was triggered, and that triggered me. It's like, okay, this is why I didn't speak up in the first place, is because I knew it would make them uncomfortable, and I'm like feeling all their stuff, and it's triggering all of that it's almost like a shame. It's like, how dare you say something like that? Like, how dare you set a boundary? And so in that instance, you can come from power, but then when you're doing this work, the inner work, when you do get triggered, it's like there's an opportunity to go in. And in that situation, it's almost like a real time. And you don't want to speak up in the first place because of the anticipation of what it's going to feel like when you do. So then when you're able to be with just, I think I like prepared myself too. I was like, okay, whatever this brings up, I'm going to be with it. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to allow it to be there. I'm going to bring love to this feeling. And that helped me set a boundary from a more powerful place.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously highly sensitive people, the three of us, this is something that's really important, really, really, really important. And what came up when you were saying that, like you mentioned about like setting a boundary and feeling their stuff, like feeling the uncomfortableness of what it is that someone else might be feeling, being in the presence of somebody and then feeling them get triggered. Like, this is all part of being a highly sensitive person, is like, yeah, you are going to feel their stuff. And especially when you set boundaries, but this is why it's even more important that HSPs, and I mean everyone in general, but HSPs especially, find their power and heal the powerlessness programs, because otherwise they will just remain in that weak, disempowered place, not setting boundaries, having people walk all over them, and the nervous system's going crazy all of the time.
Yeah, because in reality, what you're doing is you don't want to make them uncomfortable, which is just you running disempowerment programs, and then you keep them exactly where they are, and then they never get a chance to go into that. And even if they don't go into it, it's got nothing to do with you, you know? It's got to do with you take responsibility over what it brings up in you, and then graciously go into that to them. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But man, that's just a moment of elevation for you.
Right. And an opportunity for them and for the relationship too. Cause I run a lot of powerlessness programs when it comes to setting my own boundaries. But I've realized that when I do, they get the opportunity, but when it's taken, the relationship evolves to a whole new level. And so they're almost able to see, well, first you're able to see more of you. You're able to stand up and value yourself enough. And this took me going into those programs of not being valued and me not seeing and valuing my own emotions. And so setting the boundary, valuing yourself, but then valuing the friendship too. Because I've had friendships that are just very surface level because just, stuff would be done or stuff wouldn't be done. And things would come up in me and it'd just be like, it's not really worth it. And I don't want to bother I don't want to start up anything. It's just like, whatever. And it's almost like how like the apathy about the situation is almost equivalent to like an apathy about the relationship. So it's like the more you care about that relationship, you'll want to go in and be able to meet them on a deeper level. And then they also have the opportunity to not take that, and maybe they don't grow deeper with you and you end up kind of fizzling out of that relationship. But it creates more room for people who are able to meet you where you're at. Otherwise, you're just surrounded by a bunch of surface level connections. And this goes even through like the workplace. Like, you're stuck in a job that you don't feel like you can set a boundary in, and imagine setting a boundary or where you need to go or what you need to be and what you value and who you are, and the work not meeting that. Say, okay, well, that means I need to evolve out of this job because you're not able to evolve with me, and then find a different path and that's part of growing. It's part of becoming more aligned with the vision that you have for your life, more aligned with your soul, more aligned with who you truly actually are outside of the powerlessness and just all the programming.
Yeah. I mean, I can talk about boundaries because I made one with a parent this year. And it was funny because you and I were talking one night about he was like, you know, you don't need to create this boundary if you don't want to, and like blah blah blah. And I realized the reason why I created the boundary with this parent was because there was so much that, obviously the work that we do is so much inner child work, right? And we look back on the way we were raised and all the things that we went through. And I realized that I was faking my relationship with this parent just to sustain us, you know, just to let her know, okay, let my mom know, like, we're cool, we're okay, you know. And everything was like keying and like sending each other videos and like all superficial stuff. And then underneath the superficiality, I was going through so much, like so many painful things that I was healing when it comes to my relationship with her. And I realized I'm showing up in a very unloving, very weak, very superficial way because I'm not even sharing what I'm experiencing or what I'm going through, which means I'm just doing this to make her feel like we're okay. And in reality, I'm not okay. And I'm going through so many things. And so the boundary had to come from, I need this time and space to do what I need to do so that I can later show up in this relationship, meeting you where you're at and not needing you to be any differently. But the way that I was showing up was so fake. It was so surface level that I was like, this is so disempowering to me, to her, and this relationship. And so I had to really work through all the things that were coming up. I was so afraid to hurt her. I was afraid what she was going to say. I was so afraid, was she going to be sad? Was she going to be hurt? And then I had to alchemize all of that and then get to a place where I wrote that text message like a million times. And the first draft was anger. Like the second draft was hate. And I was like, okay, you cannot set a boundary from this place. And then I had to get to a place where come from love, you know, really come from love. And love is going, hey, I can't talk right now. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I need to go and work on all this resentment and hate and anger that I have towards our relationship so that I can show up in this relationship later on without having any of that, without needing you to be.
That's beautiful.
Than what you are. And there was this part of me where I needed her to change. I needed her to meet me where I was. I needed her to do the work. And it was like, you can't control another being. So stop that and create this boundary. And then because I sent it in that energy, my mom's response to me was, take your time, do what you need to do. Like, we're always here to support. And like, we're always here to do whatever you need as you work through this. And it was beautiful.
Yeah. Isn't it just like, boundaries is like a Pandora's box for all of your programming, basically. Why am I saying this? Why am I saying it this way? And just like you said, like they can feel the energy behind what you're saying. And I went through this too, where just like that initial like anger, like a lot of judgment, anger. And it's like, okay, I need them to act this way and be this way. And I've even set a boundary from that energy. Like I've set a boundary, but it was not received. It's almost like when you're coming from judgment, the other person feels that, and it's almost like an attack. So when you are attacking them with your boundary, they like unconsciously put up walls, even more walls. So they can't really see what it is you truly like, what's really going on inside. And when you haven't looked at it yourself. And so opening your heart and setting a boundary from an open heart really helps the other side open up and see truly the vulnerability.
Yes. Yeah.
The only exception to that is how much the person runs victim consciousness. Because if there's a lot of victim consciousness in there, then it can often be, it doesn't matter how lovingly you show up, they can take it very personally and feel like, you know, this is happening to them. And I mean, that's all relative, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's always the response that gets me too, because I'm always worried about making other people feel bad or making that it's like they're doing something wrong. And that's just because it triggers, like, I feel their stuff, but there's also a wounded part of me that feels like I'm doing something wrong. It feels like the shame of who I am. So when their response is the victim or the pointing fingers or the blaming, it triggers that same exact wound within me, but it gives me another opportunity to go in and be with that part of me that feels victimized, or that feels blamed, or the shame.
Mm-hmm.
And as well, like, women are not role modeled in society that it's okay to show up powerfully for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The collective, feminine wound is they have to give everything to everyone else. They have to show up subservient. They have to be soft. And if they're not soft, they're not being loving. And if they don't take care of everyone else, then, they're not a good mother. And, whatever else falls in there. So
be a good little girl.
Yeah. And so their incomes, I'm wrong if I do this thing for myself, because what I've been taught is I've got to take care of everyone else's needs before my own. And so there is in the collective shaming of any time that anyone, but especially a woman, can step into their power and say, no, I need to do this for me. And then, I feel shame for that. I feel wrong for making it all about me. Well, I don't want to be selfish.
Yeah. And a lot of like self-doubt too. Like even if you were to set a boundary or something, it's like, okay, is that really is that really coming from a good place, or am I wrong for saying that? And I have a lot of self-doubt programs come up, and I see a lot of that in the people around me too, when I've been talking to people about it. Yeah, it's tough. It really does show you all the areas that you need to go into. But on the other side, it's just like I said, when you're able to truly live in a more alignment with who you are, but you won't be able to know that until you've worked through the wounds keeping you in such a small box.
Yeah, it's actually a win-win-win for everybody. Most people
doesn't feel
like a win, but it's a huge opportunity. Yeah,
absolutely.
I've definitely struggled with this all year after setting a boundary with my mother, who I've been super close with, definitely a mesh parenting there, which is why I ended up setting the boundary, is to just create some healthy detachment for my own healing journey. And just upholding that has been such a challenge. It's on a regular, if not daily, I have to confront the emotions of guilt and shame. Oh, I'm doing something wrong to her. I'm hurting her. And I have to constantly come back to the fact that this is important to me for me to heal. And this is going to create the right healthy attachment and healthy connections that can allow a relationship to thrive, a relationship that isn't based on codependence and neediness. And that can only be achieved through healthy detachment and healthy space. But man, it's so hard because that collective programming that I spoke of earlier, it's so true for me. Even though I'm not a woman, but I still carry that same kind of wounding of, oh, well, I don't want to hurt them. Like I've got I'm wrong for making this about me. But when I did break the boundary at one point and open up some communication, it was a very clear feeling I got from my inner child that I was dishonoring him. There was too much pain still under there, too much anger, resentment that I need to still process through and heal. And I'd never want to bring that into the space, especially with my mother. So after that conversation, I was like, okay, I need to continue this boundary and uphold it, because I could feel him after it. It felt wrong. It didn't feel right for me to kind of end or break the silence and open up communication. And that was very clear. And that is part of the learning curve, is making a mistake and reflecting on the fact that, oh, okay, I set this boundary. Maybe we do need to have a conversation. So let's open it up. And then, okay, that conversation was very beneficial. However, I can still feel that I need to open this boundary, and that maybe, it would be dishonoring to and a mistake to allow this communication to keep flowing. So time to hold that and then work through all of the emotion and pain that comes up as you hold that boundary, because it is really hard, especially when you're talking about, I mean, setting a boundary with work can be a little easier because you're very detached emotionally. But when you're setting a boundary with someone that you care about, someone that you love dearly, man, it's hard.
Yeah. Do you feel like the energy of, so when you reached out and you received, did you feel like it was like filling an emptiness within you, almost like from your mom, getting more contact from your mom? Like, how did you, when the discernment, the awareness, how did that come in?
It was definitely, it was a conversation that we needed to have to kind of, for her to understand why the boundary was set in the first place, because it kind of came out of the blue for her. It didn't for me on my end, as I was, unpacking all of the things that happened in my childhood. So for me, it was the discernment piece came in. I was like, yes, we do need to have this conversation. But as we finished the conversation, kind of set kind of like boundaries. I guess that's what they were about, set boundaries moving forward, or kind of like a plan to move forward. I could really feel that it wasn't time to, it was after the conversation, I sat with the feelings of what I had, and I could just feel it was this divine shame. It was this feeling of like, oh, this is coming not from a program. This is coming from my soul to show me that I'm falling from grace right now. I'm slipping off the path of my divinity. And the divine thing in that moment was to be the honoring to my inner child and honor his emotions and his feelings around this whole boundary. And that meant I had to continue it.
So what came up for me when you're talking about that is that sometimes when we set a boundary, it's because we've gotten to a point and you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need to set this boundary. And you're in the energy of it and you have the confidence. And then, like you said, holding that boundary. So yeah, you might be good then, you might be good the next day, but then as the days and the weeks progress and you don't get that connection that you need, whether it's in your parents or your partnership, and you start to feel lonely or you start to feel like you're missing that more, then it's like, okay, now you're being pulled back into it. And that's where it turns into more of a suggestion, and people or whoever you're setting the boundary with doesn't take you as seriously, because there's still a part of you that needs them. There's still a part of you that needs that love and affection from them. This part of you that's showing up, that we are just so instantaneously reaching out for somebody else, when those are the moments that we need to go into ourselves the most.
Yep. Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because so I've been digging into this in the last 4 years since I've been on this path. Like, I've cried out for my mom so much. Like, when I'm in the deepest of the hell, like I literally say, like, I just want my mom. And now I can recognize, oh, that was my inner child showing up in that moment. And so in these last 4 months that I've created the boundary with my mom, a couple of weeks ago, I heard this little voice go, I want mom. And I went, oh my God, there she is. And I could feel her just wanting me to pick up the phone and just hear. All I need to hear was her voice, because that was like my comfort. That's my safety, right? That's the only thing my inner child knows as to be love, right? Even though there was a lot of things that were on top of what I thought love was, right? It's still this, I'm reaching out for her. And it was this beautiful moment for me to be like, I'm right here with you. Like, it's not mom. Mom will never give you what you're searching for. Because even the last 4 years when I would call my mom, it didn't make me feel better. Maybe for the moment I felt comforted because I felt like I wasn't alone. But the moment we hung up, everything was still very much there. And so I realized, like, you've learned time and time again, this safety, this love, this comfort you keep searching outside of you is not outside of you. It's within you. And so it was just great for me to see, like, okay, there she is. And it wasn't a huge shout, like, I want mom. I'm not there anymore. I've healed a lot of that. But this little tiny whisper of, like, I want my mom right now. I'm like, okay, let me love you.
And what you beautifully highlighted there is the difference between reparenting our inner child and what we offer at Masters of Self University, which is becoming the mystical parent.
Mhm.
Now, the mystical parent goes beyond reparenting and allows the child to understand that what it is they're looking for is inside themselves. When we stay in the parent-child relationship with our inner child, we're keeping ourselves trapped at that age. Yes, there can be a certain level of processing and healing that can occur 100% by giving what our inner child needs, giving that to them. So in this case, you know, what was it you were looking for from mom? Was it just
Comfort, safety, love? Yeah.
That's the first step. What we teach at MSU, and this is built into every coach learns this, is how to become the mystical parent, which is teach that inner child to find that from within themselves. Because if they can do that, then they can mature out of whatever cycle or pattern they're stuck in.
Yeah. And it's empowering for my inner child. Like when I've spent time coddling my inner child, it don't feel right. Like something was always missing. And then when I started doing this work, I was like, oh, there it is. That's what it is. Because she is me and what I am is what she is. So connect her back. Mm-hmm. Like she's powerful enough to do all this. Like, you know, I think what all of our inner children who are doing this work are realizing is like, holy crap, I've just been so disconnected from who I was. Nobody's teaching me these things. So of course I'm going to lean on mom. Of course I'm going to lean on dad. And mom and dad are not perfect and they're not enlightened. And they've got all their stuff. And so of course we're going to grow up as these disconnected, powerless beings. And now this work is let's connect back. Let's go back. Let's go home. You know?
Right. And some people might think, well, you mean you're being that for yourself. Like you're being the parent, you're showing them. But if you feel into the energy from the child is still, well, like, I need you to be something for me. And it's not turning in. And so it's just taking you like one big step deeper because it's the energy of needing and the energy of looking to somebody else, even though, you are the same person, but it is your inner child. And so teaching her to go in and be that for herself, that is empowerment right there.
And letting her know, like, I'm right here. I'm rocking with you. Let's do this together. Yeah.
Being able to support, but not take the full responsibility of being everything that your inner child needs.
Yeah, because then we're in the same cycle again.
Right.
Yeah, we can't touch on boundaries without bringing up the word codependency, because when we really start setting boundaries, it starts to shine that light of, oh, where were we dependent on another? Like in our partnership, whenever there's a boundary set, it's like, oh, okay, well, clearly I can't do that anymore, which means I was depending on you for that if I'm needing you to do it. So it's a beautiful opportunity on both sides if you're willing to do the work to see what it is that you were in fact needing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. And I was thinking too, it was like some of the mental, so let's talk about mental programs for a second, because they be tricky and they're trying to sabotage you. And so something that I've been struggling with in the past few weeks is like, I've got these mental programs that go, they're getting older and they're going to die. And like, how guilty are you going to feel when they die and you spent this time away from them and hurting them and not, and then I'm like, oh my God, I have to contact them. Like, I have to like stop this boundary right now because they're going to die. And like, I'm going to feel all this guilt. And then I had to come back to my center. And I'm like, Ellie, there it is. That's how the programs sabotage you. Because when I actually feel into the energy of picking up the phone and calling, I don't feel good. And like, I'm just not ready to do that yet. Doesn't mean that I'm not ready to handle whatever comes up when I do decide to do that. But I'm just not in a place where like, I can still feel a lot of hatred. I can still feel a lot of anger and resentment. And I still need to work on those things. And I want to get to the place where even if I have little bits of those pieces, I still am in a powerful place of showing up now in that relationship. But like the mental programs and they were really getting me. Like I remember picking up my phone, being like, I need to contact them because they're going to die. They're older. It's like, Ellie, come back. Trust in the process. Trust that in divine timing, you will reach out and it will be beautiful and it'll be great. But it's not right now.
Right. Yeah. And when it comes to boundaries, I think of like sticking with being okay with the outcome. And this is more when I'm thinking of like relationships and romantic partnerships. But I feel like a lot of times the heavy, important boundaries are skipped over because of the fear of losing somebody. And if you have that fear, that's what keeps you from really truly stepping into your power and being able to set down boundaries around yourself, because you're afraid that they won't accept it. You're afraid that it'll trigger them. You're afraid that it'll upset. And I feel like romantic partnerships, as long as, like, I mean, same with parents. I mean, those deep connections that you have with somebody that are typically set in codependency, those are the hardest boundaries to set. And so a big point for me was being okay with the outcome. If I'm going to set this boundary, knowing that this is how I needed to be treated, this is how, coming from a whole healed place, this is how I need you to show up or not show up. I need to be okay with potentially losing this person. And what is that bringing up in me? Where have I shown up in codependency, and what do I need to go into? Because if you're not okay, if there's part of you that says, okay, I'm going to set this boundary, but if it gets too shaky, then we'll just drop it. Then that's you not valuing yourself enough and not being powerful to stay with that boundary.
And as a parent, Madison, like you've got a very cute little newborn and is
4-year-old.
a 4-year-old. Do you want your children to need you forever?
No.
See,
and we could do a whole podcast on this, which we probably will when it comes to parenting, but I don't want my child to need me forever, but I see so many parents that need to be needed. They need their child to need them, and it's like you're subconsciously keeping them in codependency.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's because they a lot of it's stemming from the way they were parented, and maybe they didn't get the love and affection that they needed, so they have this hole, this emptiness, this fear of maybe abandonment. And I mean, this is a whole different parenting podcast, but how we use our children to feed our wounding, like how we project onto them. And so when it comes to boundaries with kids, I constantly have to check myself. I'm more like, I tend to fall into more of a rigid parenting style. And so I am setting boundaries, but is this a boundary from wholeness? Is this a boundary from like an open heart and connected? Or is this a boundary because I am falling into woundedness and wanting control in my life? And I feel like my daughter feels which one it is. And when it's not coming from a whole place, she is like sassy. She's like, no. She will say no. She'll be defiant. And I feel like she can kind of sense that when it's simple things like, don't be playing with that, but it's something really simple, but you're just wanting to control. And it's like, she knows how ridiculous that sounds. And so that's where, when it comes to parenting, the boundary thing for me in my situation is like, okay, am I just coming from this need to control, or am I actually like, this is actually a boundary that I need to set with them?
Wow. That must be a whole new world. That's a whole other thing. Wow.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Beautiful. But I'm sure we'll go into more in another parenting podcast, but
for sure.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
The codependency, that's where it all stems from too. And it kind of passes down. So the codependency in your parents' relationship with you, and then like seeing how that passes down into your kids, and not being able to set any boundaries, coming from more of like a permissive parenting style or an enmeshed, needing them to be happy all the time, needing them to, like, if they're upset with you, what does that trigger within you? Yeah, it's all like, it's different relationships, but it's all similar programming.
And on a soul level, the way that what I always come back to is, our parents are there to bring us into the world and to allow us to mature up. And the biggest honor we can give them is maturing and evolving and actually growing up out of any dysfunctional parenting style, anything that could be potentially toxic or destructive for us to continue to carry on. So I always try and come back to that and be like, although it doesn't feel like it, I'm actually honoring them as a parent to do this, even if it feels terrible.
Yeah. It's an opportunity for them to really reflect on, like, why is my child creating a boundary and what actually happened? And yeah, parents, take some time to reflect on that. There's no blaming. There's no pointing. We'll do that in our own, privacy. But man, go into that, because it's honoring you and it's honoring the child.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I noticed myself too, like, especially when I first started doing this work, wanting to set like rigid boundaries around my daughter, just so she and the people around her, so she, not that I don't get triggered, but so she doesn't get triggered, so she doesn't have stuff coming up, or I'm so afraid that she's going to get traumatized and she's all like going to develop all these wounds, and like, holy crap, like, were those boundaries coming from wholeness? Were they coming from control programs?
Right.
Because that's also keeping them in powerlessness, when you're not able to reflect on that. It's like, okay, you don't think that they can handle what it is that is going to come up for them. And when are you going to be able, you have to be able to teach them how to handle the situations that they're in and be able to connect to their own power. Because otherwise you're just raising them in powerlessness.
Yeah. And it's denying their divinity,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great episode. Everybody out there, create your boundaries. Do it. Okay. And go into whatever it brings up as you make the move.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And love yourself through if you do make a mistake, and set them from an open heart whenever possible.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To anybody at home, if you want to work with Madison or any of the amazing mystical life coaches, we do one-on-one and we do group classes. So set up a free consultation with us at mastersofselfuniversity.com.
Yeah. And until next time, Madison, thank you so much for joining us. If you know someone that's struggling with boundaries, please share this with them. The more that you can share these podcasts, the more we can put them on for free. So please like and subscribe. If
Comment,
you enjoyed this,
rate it.
Yeah.
And until next time, we'll see you guys then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.